Thanks, Kieran. Right then, it's on to me. So yeah, I'm gonna try and make sure this isn't too dry for you all. Sorry, I usually attempt to have maybe a more kind of entertaining talk. You were going to get a talk on potentially on the earthworms and leeches I found the other day, hidden at the back of my collection. These things do still happen. There were some worms and earthworms and leeches collected on the 1924 Everest expedition. So I got very excited finding those. And then Irving's foot was found, which I thought was like that, yes, some kind of sign that I should have been doing this talk. But unfortunately, then the photographer at the museum left unexpectedly, and I haven't had the images back in time. So we might, because it would be the 100th year anniversary too. So I might have to do that next year and then make you all pretend that it's the 100-year anniversary next year. And then I can do that and yeah, maybe make a bit more of a showy presentation. But I'm hoping you'll be interested in this project because, well, partly because it's used your data. So all the NERS data that are connected to agricultural environments in the UK has all gone into producing the stats behind which species we need to be looking at. So that's brilliant. And yes, and me and Victoria, who's also an ESB member, we've been working hard to get this together. So, and also maybe you do field surveys within Europe, and maybe this is something that will interest you all as well. I hope so. So anyway, this project basically came about by accident, and it just really happened because working at the museum, we took on a big Horizon 2020 grant to study. Well, there was a massive consortium grant, but we took on the role as part of that to identify the earthworms of this grant. And I'll go into a bit more about the grant later, but basically it was researching various bioinoculants that were being used on crops such as tomatoes and strawberries, and then having a look at what effect this was happening on the soil fauna. So I knew as part of this grant, if I took on the identifications, that I was going to be receiving earthworms from a number of different countries. And that very much excited me. I was really, really pleased to be doing this. But at the same time, I did realize it was going to be a bit of a mighty challenge. So obviously in the UK, we have sort of 32 or maybe, well, UK and Ireland, maybe up to 33 different species. And in the UK alone, so around 31 to 32 different species. So yeah, I was very confident with those, but I realized this was going to be an uphill challenge because the countries we were going to have material sent in from were from the UK, Austria, Germany, Poland, Italy, Slovenia, Denmark, and France. Hopefully I've got that map right. But yes, so this was going to be quite a challenge potentially to identify worms coming in from all these different countries. So the first thing, so obviously when identifying the worms from the UK, there's only actually a few characters that you're regularly using. Whereas it was very clear that with the number of species I was likely to get from all of these different countries, this was going to be on another scale. There was going to be potentially a lot of dissection, yeah, potentially some mounting material up. I really wasn't sure exactly what it was all going to involve. So the first thing I thought of doing was trying to find, obviously, the keys. So I figured I'd need a key to each of the different countries. But actually, anyone who's tried finding these keys will pretty quickly find out that they just don't exist. There's brilliant, absolutely fantastic key to Hungary, which is great. And obviously there's lots of crossover of species, but that's just one country and not one that specifically on the list. There is a fantastic volume from Boucher on the earthworms of France, but it was published in the 1970s. So not exactly up to date. And yes, it's not the easiest either. So I just started to pull together the species numbers per country. And that was potentially a bad thing to do because it just gives you an idea of the difficulty that it was potentially going to bring to try and get try to build some kind of species list that was a species that could potentially be there. So for example, if you have a look at France in Boucher's book, there are about 140 different species mentioned, but actually talking to French colleagues, they say, well, already there's about 200 different species. And yeah, in the Hungarian book, there's 59 from Romania, because hopefully, since sadly his death, Victor Pop's book will be finished, maybe by Csaba from Hungary. And in that, there'll be 77 species from Romania. Again, not exactly on the list, but so few of the countries have keys at all or species lists. So, I mean, if you were going to try and put together a key to all these different species, it'd be impossible before I was receiving the samples. I mean, I guess that would be probably a whole PhD to put together the earthworms of Europe and sort out some of the taxonomic issues as well. But I was aware that obviously, actually, I'm only looking in agricultural environments. And it's been said, obviously, a number of times that, disturbed habitats, you are not going to get the same diversity of earthworm species. That's just not going to happen. And as a good student of Dr. Victor Pop, as I mentioned, he's always been saying as well, especially about the main European family, the Lumbricidae, that they're actually mountainous species, really, and that all the endemic fauna and the real diversity is actually found in the mountains, and certainly very undisturbed areas. Once you get into the really disturbed habitats, you are getting a lot of the cosmopolitan or peregrine species. There's way less diversity. So yes, I started to delve into that a bit more. And so, for example, of those 77 species in Romania, 51% are only found in the mountains. And even in the big mapping, European mapping paper, Rudiger's et al. 2016, they say there are steep changes between the unmanaged areas and moving into the agricultural on species diversity. So what I needed to do, I realized, was to try to ascertain what this smaller disturbed habitat pool of earthworms would be. So I figured actually the best thing to do was to trawl through the papers that have been published by researchers across Europe and actually pull together a list of all the species that are recorded from these types of habitat. But even that was pretty hard to do. Like when I originally started pulling together some of the papers, I only found a few hundred, and most of those did not list the earthworms to species. It was all biomass or some ecological groups. Occasionally, some had listed them to species, but oddly, of those, quite a few said their book that they'd used was Sims and Gerard, which I found staggering because these are not surveys from the UK. So Sims and Gerard, for those of you that don't know, is a really good guide to the earthworms of the UK. It's just, you know, a bit out of date now, but that's a great guide. It's to the earthworms of Ireland and the UK. And these were people in Central Europe using it in these environments. So it just showed that there really was a need for this. People were struggling to find a resource. So I didn't find enough in this first trawl. So I decided, right, we need to just look across pretty much the whole of Europe. And I also needed a lot of help. So Victoria came to join me, and and then that made an absolutely huge difference. So she was able to use techie good stuff, all the coding and things like that, to then find thousands and thousands of relevant papers. Again, once we trawled through them, a lot didn't actually record things to species, but we were finally able to get some really meaningful data. And then Victoria was also able to then turn this into something really meaningful. We actually got some really good stats, and we started to get a really good handle on what was going on with all her wizardry. So yes, in the end, these are color coded by the number of sources we were able to find. So from some areas, we still didn't get too many sources of information. In the UK, a lot. So that's nice. But yes, it really varies on the countries how many people are publishing earthworms from surveys on earthworms to species. But I'm hoping if this project pays off, there'll be an awful lot more. But let's see. So we kind of got to this stage. So we started to pull this together, and we started to see that actually in the Excalibur project, we had things in orchards and vineyards, well, mainly orchards for the project, actually. The vineyards we used for the paper, but we had species from orchards. We had the grassland and arable area. And then the area in the middle is the overlap, because that's the big thing as well of, yes, what is this overlap? So we thought about having just one key, but actually then you're making it harder for people. Again, the whole point of this key would be to make something that actually everyone could use, because the big thing is just encouraging people to record earthworms. If there's a way to do it easily, to basically open this up to record earthworms, across when you're doing your surveys, basically to actually record things to species. Because as Kieran mentioned in his talk too, you're going to get so much more data rather than just using biomass. Actually look at the species diversity, because it's that's going to tell you how healthy your soil is, rather than just having lots and lots of one species. So our first attempt had that kind of had those sets. So we ran this again, and I don't know, sorry, this isn't coming up quite as well as I'd hoped. But basically, then after we did another go, we had 19 different species that were just kind of being recorded in the arable and cropland, 36 different species that were found in both of these areas, and 17 to the perennial. So we realized that if we made 2 separate keys, we could actually keep the keys to a really manageable number of species. So sort of just over 50 odd species in each one, which actually then enables us to make these keys easy and simple, but hopefully comprehensive. Now, the arable key, so I don't know if you can see properly, sorry, on this graph, I'll try and move that. So the arable key, you can see is kind of flattening out on the curve. So we think this is basically saying that we've got all of these sources. Again, this is Victoria's wizardry, but we've got all of these sources, all of these species, and by mapping it out, she thinks we're sort of reaching the end of a curve to say, basically, you will find some more species that aren't in the key. So we're going to make sure there's massive caveats throughout that if things don't completely fit, don't key it out. Maybe get in touch, because we'd love to know what people are finding and what not. And yeah, if we can add more to it, we absolutely would love to. But it looks like things, most of the things you will find will be in our key. With the perennial key, so the orchards, vineyards, and olive groves, we're still rising. So there just haven't been enough surveys there. So that key will be less accurate. There'll be lots more caveats. And yeah, but again, we want lots of interaction with people using it to find out what else we could be adding in. So that's where we are with that. Sorry, I'm running out of time. Sorry, I haven't been keeping to time too well. Anyway, I thought it was interesting to show some of the most common and just seeing how common they are. So Abractidea caliginosa is found in about 80% of surveys that you'll carry out in these sort of disturbed environments. And I thought I'd show you an old friend that will obviously turn up in the key, but maybe a species as well you might not have seen before. But we can basically put this key together in a very similar way to the current field studies council guide. So they will mainly be based again on those same characters. We will have to resort to some slightly trickier ones, but where we do, so like spermathecal pores comes up, you do have to, in a few instances, dissect and count the number of spermatici. In one case, do a bit of CT spacing measurements, but that's just one caveat. So basically, where we do have these more tricky parts, it's only to separate just a few species. It's not right at the start of the key, and it's not separating out a big chunk of them. So yes, sorry, I've gone a bit over time, but just said, so the Field Studies Council have said they will publish our keys. So we're hoping to have them ready for a test version sort of around the spring of 2025. So if anyone does fancy taking these keys for a spin, and they are maybe traveling to anywhere else, or just want to try them out in the UK, because obviously they should work there as well. You're just going to have a few more species in there. So yes, please do let me know. And yeah, I'll stop there.